She didn't even hear the sixth bullet. By then, her body had gone numb, every nerve drowning under a flood of pain and adrenaline. The only thing she did hear, loud, raw, and desperate, were the screams of her brothers in arms. They were pinned down, bleeding, broken, and waiting for someone to get them out. And in that moment, she made a choice that would etch her name into the memory of every soldier who lived that day. Sergeant Elena Torres had always been the quiet one in her unit. At 5'7", lean and wiry, with sharp brown eyes that read people faster than they spoke, she wasn't the type to brag or boast. She let her actions speak, and those actions had already earned her respect in training and in combat. But respect was one thing. What she was about to do would go far beyond that. The firefight had erupted in the middle of a ruined village in the mountains. Their convoy had been ambushed. RPGs, machine guns, and sniper fire cutting through the narrow streets like a storm of lead. Elena's team had been scattered in seconds. Explosions shook the ground, walls collapsed, and smoke turned the air into a suffocating fog. Amid it all, 4 soldiers, 2 of them barely conscious, were trapped behind a burning vehicle with enemy fire raining down on them. Elena sprinted toward them. That's when the first round tore through her shoulder, spinning her sideways. She stumbled, gritted her teeth, and pushed forward. The second round slammed into her thigh. Her legs screamed in agony, but she didn't stop. By the time the third and fourth bullets punched into her side and lower back, her vision blurred with black dots. Yet she kept running, because stopping meant watching her brothers die. When she finally reached the men, they were stunned to see her still moving. One of them, Private Harris, could barely lift his head. "You're hit," he whispered, blood trickling from his lips. Elena didn't waste words. She dropped beside him, hooked her arms under his shoulders, and with strength that seemed borrowed from somewhere beyond human, hoisted him onto her back. The movement sent shockwaves of pain through her wounds, but she staggered forward. The enemy's gunfire followed her every step, sparking off the crumbling walls, tearing holes into the ground around her boots. She carried Harris behind a broken wall and laid him down gently. Before he could even protest, she was already running back. The fifth bullet hit her as she lifted Corporal James, slamming into her ribs with the force of a hammer. Her knees buckled, her vision went white. For a heartbeat, she thought it was over. But somewhere deep inside, past the agony, she remembered her mother's words from long ago. When you think you have nothing left, that's when you find who you really are. So she stood. She carried James. Step by step, her boots dragging through dirt soaked with smoke and fire, she carried him to safety. 2 down, 2 more. Her uniform was soaked crimson now, her breaths shallow, ragged. The sixth bullet struck her lower back as she lifted Sergeant Daniels. She screamed, an animal sound ripped from the core of her soul, but she did not fall. She refused to. With Daniel's arm draped over her shoulders, she staggered toward cover, her body threatening to collapse at every step. By the time she reached the last soldier, Specialist Rivera, she was barely conscious. Her arms trembled, her knees gave out every few steps, and her blood left a trail behind her. Rivera, half conscious himself, begged her not to try. "Leave me, please, you can't." But Elena shook her head weakly. Her lips barely formed the words, "We all go home." And so she lifted him. Every inch of her body screamed betrayal. Her wounds burned, her lungs felt like they were drowning, and the world spun in dizzy circles. But step by agonizing step, she carried him through the storm of bullets, shielding him with her body. By the time she collapsed behind cover, laying Rivera beside the others, she had nothing left. Her body crumpled, blood pooling beneath her. The last thing she remembered before darkness took her was the sound of helicopters overhead and her brothers shouting her name. Elena survived. Against every odd, she woke up days later in a hospital, tubes in her arms, machines beeping steadily at her side. Her body was shattered, riddled with scars, but her spirit was unbroken. When her commanding officer told her she had carried all 4 men to safety while shot 6 times, she shook her head in disbelief. "I didn't carry them," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "They carried me." The story of that day spread far beyond the walls of her unit. To some, it was a tale of impossible endurance. To others, proof of what loyalty and love for your brothers and sisters in arms can drive a human being to do. But to Elena, It was simple. No one gets left behind. Not on her watch. She was awarded the nation's highest honor for valor. Reporters, politicians, and generals praised her as a hero. But when asked what pushed her to keep going despite 6 bullets tearing through her, she gave the same answer every time. Because they would have done the same for me. And that is where her story leaves its mark. Not in the medals or ceremonies, but in the unshakable truth that courage is not the absence of fear or pain. Courage is love in action. Courage is sacrifice. And courage is the choice to keep moving forward, even when your body says you can't. Elena Torres taught the world that day that a soldier's strength is not measured by how many bullets they can take, but by how far they will go to carry someone else when no one else can. When Elena Torres woke in the hospital, it wasn't the pain that scared her, it was the silence. No gunfire, no shouting, no chaos. Just the hum of machines and the distant voices of doctors in the hallway. For the first time in weeks, her war was over. But the battles inside her were only just beginning. Her body was a map of scars. 6 bullet wounds had torn through muscle, shattered bone, and left her struggling just to sit up in bed. The doctors said it was a miracle she survived. But Elena didn't feel like a miracle. She felt broken. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in that village, hearing the ricochet of bullets, the weight of her brothers on her back, the taste of blood in her mouth. She thought she'd find comfort in their survival. But when the men she saved came to visit, she was overwhelmed. Private Harris arrived first, leaning on crutches, tears filling his eyes as he took her hand. "You carried me when I couldn't move a finger," he whispered. "How'd I ever repay that?" Elena tried to smile, but the words caught in her throat. She didn't want repayment. She just wanted to forget the feeling of nearly losing them. But the military doesn't give much time for healing. Reporters crowded her room. Politicians sent letters. Cameras flashed when she was strong enough to attend the medal ceremony. They called her a hero, a warrior, a living legend. And yet, when she looked in the mirror, she saw someone else, someone she barely recognized. A woman whose eyes had seen too much, whose body carried not just scars, but the weight of lives almost lost. Recovery was its own battlefield. Months of physical therapy tested her limits. Every step felt like dragging chains. Some days she collapsed, sobbing in frustration, convinced she would never walk without pain again. But then she would remember Rivera's voice, weak but determined, whispering, "We all go home." And she would force herself to take another step. The men she carried never left her side. Sergeant Daniels visited daily, pushing her to keep fighting. Corporal James sat through therapy sessions, cracking jokes to lighten the mood, even when she wanted to scream. And Rivera, still healing himself, promised her that they were family now, bound by more than blood. They weren't just the men she saved. They were the reason she kept living. But the real turning point came one quiet evening, long after the noise of ceremonies and news cameras faded. Elena was alone in her hospital room, staring at the medals laid neatly on the table. They glittered under the light, heavy with meaning, but they felt hollow. She thought of the soldiers who never came home, of the families who'd never get to hug their loved ones again. Why had she survived when so many hadn't? The guilt crushed her chest. She buried her face in her hands, whispering into the silence, "Why me?" And then the answer came, not from her own voice, but from the doorway. Private Harris, leaning on his crutches, had overheard her. His voice was steady, though tears shimmered in his eyes. "Because you were strong enough to carry us when no one else could. Because you're still carrying us, even now." In that moment, Elena realized something. Her story wasn't just hers. It belonged to every soldier who ever felt broken, every survivor who questioned why they made it home. Her scars weren't just reminders of pain. They were proof of resilience, of what the human spirit could endure when driven by love and loyalty. When she was finally cleared to leave the hospital, Elena didn't retreat into silence. Instead, she chose a new battlefield, helping others heal. She visited wounded soldiers, sat with them through their darkest nights, and told them what no one had told her: "You're not weak for feeling broken. You're alive because you're stronger than you think." Years later, her story would be told in classrooms, at military academies, and in quiet living rooms where young recruits watched in awe. But Elena never wanted fame. What she wanted was to remind the world of a truth she carried deep in her soul, that courage isn't about never falling. Courage is about carrying others, even when you can barely carry yourself. And though her body would always carry the pain of those 6 bullets, her spirit carried something greater. The unshakable bond of family forged in fire, and the knowledge that when one soldier rises, they lift others with them. Elena Torres was never the same after that day. But neither were the men she saved. And together, they lived not as victims of war, but as survivors who proved that even in the darkest moments, the human heart is capable of miracles.